All right, let's get started, and more folks will join as we go. So thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon. Before we jump in, I'd love to give a little bit of background about who we are. 3R is a full-service sustainability consulting firm, and we work with a variety of clients in various industries, helping them with all sorts of things that are sustainability related, from management system support to climate related work and greenhouse gas emissions measurement, target setting, energy in the built environment, and we have a whole division that supports assurance work as well. We are a CDP accredited provider, an EcoVadis strategic training partner, a B Corp, and a women-owned enterprise, among many things, but we certainly walk the talk. Yeah, we're really excited to have you all here today. So, here we are. Sorry, I'm not doing a good job already yet. Flipping to the next slide. But this is a little bit about us, as you can see, and as I just said. We offer multiple webinars throughout the year. You can stay in the loop with our upcoming webinars by joining our mailing list or by following us on LinkedIn. You can also scan the QR code that you see here to learn more. All of our webinars are free to attend. And some of our upcoming webinars, as you can see, include content on double materiality in July, supplier engagement in August, and LEAD in September. So on to today's presenters and topic. I'd love to introduce Sarah Diamond and Megan Tarrant. Both are senior consultants here at 3R on our climate and greenhouse gas team. They're both deeply familiar with climate-related reporting standards and frameworks, including CDP, which we'll be discussing today. And they've been most recently kind of deep in the weeds on things like the California climate laws, which of course include climate risk assessment work. Both Sarah and Megan will be providing their expertise on CDP today and climate risk, and which we hope we can help unlock the value behind this global questionnaire. So for our agenda today, first we will give a brief overview of CDP and discuss the business value in responding to this questionnaire. Next, we will dive into the CDP questionnaire, focusing on the risk modules. We will then discuss some challenges that may arise and tips on how to overcome them. And then finally, we'll open up and kind of conclude with a Q&A. So if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them throughout the webinar, and we'll certainly get to all of them at the end. So to get us started, what is the Climate Disclosure Project? I'm going to hand it off to Sarah Diamond.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining today. So the Climate Disclosure Project, commonly known as CDP, is an initiative to address environmental challenges through transparency and accountability. And I'm going to touch on a few points here. So first, CDP operates as a global platform that enables companies, cities, states, and regions to disclose their environmental data. And it's really not just about reporting, it's about empowering decision makers with insights that drive Earth positive action. So whether that is investors looking to fund sustainable businesses or governments shaping policy, CDP provides the data backbone for informed and impactful choices. CDP collects data across a wide range of environmental topics, and these include climate change, water security, forests, biodiversity, and plastics. And not only does it collect the data, but it integrates this data with standards on governance, strategy, risk management, and performance metrics, offering a more holistic view of how organizations are really managing their environmental responsibilities. One of CDP's strengths is its interoperability with major reporting frameworks. So it is fully aligned with IFRS S2, which was formerly TCFD, ensuring consistency with international financial reporting, as well as other reporting standards that you may be required to report to. It has a high degree of interoperability with ESRS, which is supporting the European sustainability goals. It's partially aligned with the TNFD, so that's helping organizations disclose nature-related risks, and it's also working really closely with the GRI standards to kind of harmonize best practices in sustainability reporting. So in summary, CDP is more than just a reporting tool, but it is a strategic enabler for environmental stewardship. And by participating in CDP, organizations not only demonstrate their transparency, but also really position themselves as leaders in the transition to a more sustainable future. So let's take a closer look at the business value that CDP brings to organizations. So first, we have benchmarking. So CDP enables companies to compare their environmental performance with their industry peers and leaders, and this really helps identify performance gaps and opportunities for improvement, and also supports goal setting and tracking progress over time, which is essential for continuous improvement. Next, we have transparency and investor confidence. So by disclosing through CDP, companies demonstrate accountability on climate and other environmental issues, which builds trust with investors, customers, and other stakeholders. And it can also enhance sustainability ratings and improve a company's reputation. Resilience. So CDP helps organizations identify and mitigate climate-related risks, such as supply chain disruptions or regulatory changes, which contributes to long-term business continuity and risk preparedness. And tools like scenario planning are really important parts of CDP, as well as building overall organizational resilience. Next, we have access to capital and savings, and companies who disclose are more attractive to sustainability-focused investors and lenders and can unlock things like green financing and preferential loan terms. And additionally, CDP helps identify efficiency opportunities, which can lead to cost savings in the future. Strategic planning. So CDP data supports the integration of environmental risks into the core business strategy and encourages innovation and the development of sustainable products and services. And this alignment with sustainability goals really enhances long-term competitiveness and value creation for your organization. And lastly, regulatory readiness. As I mentioned already, as disclosure regulations evolve, such as IFRS S2, CSRD, and ESRS, CDP really helps companies stay ahead and reduces compliance risk and eases the burden of reporting. And they align with global frameworks to ensure consistency and credibility. So many of the questions you'll answer in CDP will also be applicable to other reporting standards that you might be required to report under. Okay, so taking a closer look at the structure of the questionnaire, this really will help organizations understand how CDP organizes its questionnaire and disclosure process and what areas companies are expected to report on. So the questionnaire is divided into two main categories, as you can see here on the slide. The first is integrated modules, and these modules really apply broadly across all sectors and provide the foundational context for environmental disclosure. So these include the introduction, which is just general company information and your reporting scope. The second is identification, assessment, and management of dependencies, risks, and opportunities. So here organizations will describe how they identify and manage environmental dependencies, risks, as well as opportunities to mitigate and adapt to those risks. And then the disclosure of risks and opportunities really dives deeper into the specific risks and opportunities organizations have already identified related to climate, water, or forest, including their potential financial and strategic impacts. Governance focuses on the governance structures in place in your organization to oversee these environmental issues, such as board level oversight or executive accountability. And then business strategy is where companies really explain how environmental considerations are integrated into their overall strategy and planning. And lastly, we have the consolidation approach, which is just a high-level view of environmental performance across all relevant areas, setting the stage for the more detailed environmental disclosures. So then the second part of this is the specific environmental performance modules, and this really allows for more detailed topic-specific reporting based on the organization's environmental impacts. So everyone who does the CDP questionnaire has to report for climate change. So this covers your emissions data, targets, any climate-related risks and opportunities, energy-related data, et cetera. And then many companies also have to report for forest and water. So forest really focuses on deforestation, risks and sustainable sourcing practices, and water security is addressing water usage, risks, and management strategies as well. There's also two sections that are newer, and they are both unscored. First being plastics, which really looks at plastic use, waste, and circularity efforts. This is applicable to your business. And second is biodiversity, which looks at how companies impact and depend on biodiversity and what actions they're taking to protect it. So understanding the structure is really important to preparing a comprehensive and aligned disclosure, and it ensures that organizations not only report data, but also show how environmental issues are embedded into their governance strategy and overall operations. So a big portion of the CDP questionnaire really relies on disclosing information about risks and opportunities, which can be identified through a climate risk assessment. And this really helps organizations understand and manage their exposure to these risks and involves three main steps. First would be to conduct a qualitative assessment to identify these risks, which would include both transition risks. So this would be something like policy changes, shifts in the market, or reputational impacts, and physical risks, which include extreme weather events or long-term risks such as rising sea levels, for example. The goal here is really to flag risks that are medium to high in likelihood and could have a material impact on your organization. Once these risks are identified, the next step is to assess their financial materiality, which involves estimating the potential financial impacts of each risk. It's really important to collaborate with any relevant business units here. This could be a risk management team, for example, to determine whether these risks could be considered material from a financial reporting perspective. And lastly, is to compile a comprehensive report, which includes key findings, methodologies, and any identified adaptation or mitigation opportunities. And it's really important to ensure that internal stakeholders understand the risks and the organization's response to them. As mentioned, CDP asks organizations to identify, assess, and disclose climate-related and other environmental performance risks and opportunities in this framework, especially when aligned with IFRS or TCFD, ensures that disclosures are standardized, transparent, and decision useful. Assessing financial materiality really helps organizations understand how climate risks affect their bottom line, which is a key component of CDP's focus on environmental impact and business resilience. And producing a report and materials for internal stakeholders on the risk response enhances the internal awareness for your company and external transparency as well, both of which are core to CDP's mission to driving environmental actions through disclosure. And now Megan's going to talk more specifically about the two modules that focus specifically on risks.
Thanks, Sarah. So yes, like Sarah mentioned, there are a few modules that are more specific to the elements of a risk assessment, and we've pulled together a few questions that we'd like to talk through. Module 2 is the identification, assessment, and management of dependencies, risks, and opportunities. It's one of the longer titles. And the goal of this module is to identify how the applicable environmental issues affect your operations, your value chain, your stakeholders, and to understand the dependencies on natural systems and the resulting risks and opportunities. So it is in the integrated module section. So it does include inputs for the applicable environmental topics for each company that's submitting. So climate change for everyone and forests and water for those that it is applicable to them. This module is more about procedures that are in place. And there are a few key features about how these processes that are more specific to climate risk assessments, like how the organization defines time horizons, how it defines a substantive effect, as well as how priority locations are identified. the goal of this module is to generate confidence that the risks and opportunities disclosed are comprehensive. Over the next few slides, I'll go over a specific question from Module 2 that we've pulled up, and there will be that blue star that you see in the bottom of the slide here on those slides for direct tie-ins for climate risk assessments based on what Sarah just kind of covered on the last slide. So looking at question 2.2.2 within Module 2, I'm asking disclosures to provide details of their process for identifying, assessing, and managing environmental dependencies, impacts, risks, and/or opportunities. So best practice when answering the question would be to demonstrate that companies are incentivized to have a comprehensive process in place to assess both risks and opportunities, as well as dependencies and impacts. As you can see, there are a lot of details to be included in this question. The question will be based on each environmental issue that your disclosure is responding to. So you can enter information for climate change, forests, water security, plastics, and biodiversity for any that you're responding to. So the next step would be to select which of these elements, if it's dependencies, impacts, risks, and opportunities, are covered by the process that's being disclosed through a drop-down list. So you select all that apply. The key columns to look at are coverage, supplier tiers covered, frequency of assessment, time horizons covered, location specificity, tools and methods used, risk types considered, and partners and stakeholders considered. Most of these columns provide a drop-down list in the questionnaire. CDP best practice would be a risk and opportunity assessment that has full coverage, covers all time horizons and all value chain stages, and is at least once a year. So the supplier tiers covered, the options are direct operations, upstream or downstream value chain. The coverage can be either full or partial. The tiers of suppliers is 1 through 4, and it can be qualitative or quantitative or both. Frequency is, I believe, less than a year, yearly, or more frequently. And the time horizons are short-term, medium-term, or long-term, which, as Sarah mentioned, is something that a company has to define for themselves and is a key part of a climate risk assessment. The types of tools and methodology used can be selected also from a drop-down list based on the process your organization follows in a risk assessment. CDP's best practice is the process be informed by at least 2 credible and publicly available tools. And then risk types and criteria considered directly relate to risk assessments. So the drop-down list would include transition and physical risks, each with their own sub-list of specific risks of those types. Like Sarah mentioned, extreme weather events or kind of more long-term weather events like sea level rise. CDP's best practice is to have at least 3 risk types considered, with up to 7 risk types for improved scoring opportunities available. Partners and stakeholders being considered through this process, this could be customers, employees, investors, suppliers, is also something that directly relates to a risk assessment. And CDP's best practice is to consider at least 2 key stakeholders. And as you can see, the final element of this question is an open text box or a narrative text box where disclosures can provide a detailed explanation of the process that might be part of your enterprise risk management or that could come directly from a climate risk assessment. Module 3 is then the actual disclosure of risks and opportunities based on the processes outlined in Module 2. So this module includes reporting specific risks, the effects of those risks, and the organization's response to the risks, and how those risks and responses are integrated into the organization's overall strategy, as well as the scenario analysis process and reporting specific opportunities. So we'll look at a question from Module 3, again, looking for that blue star for connections from the question directly to climate risk assessments. Because this question is disclosing risks, you can see there are a lot of blue stars because so many of the elements that CDP is asking for are really closely aligned with the climate risk assessment. So many of these details will come from conducting that risk assessment. Question 3.1.1 is asking disclosures to provide details of the environmental risks that have been identified, which have had a substantive effect on their organization in the reporting year, or are anticipated to have an effect on the organization in the future. This is why it's important in Module 2 to report how your organization defines that substantive effect. This question has you answer all of these elements listed here for each risk. So you would start by creating a risk identifier such as climate change 1, climate change 2, climate change 3, and so on. And then the same, naming methodology would be used for forests or water security. You list each risk with the different environmental topic it's linked to. Risk types identified in the processes in Module 2 through question 2.2.2 can be seen here again for each specific risk you are disclosing. So that would include transition risks, physical risks, and all of the kind of subsection risks of those. Like Sarah mentioned, transition risks are risks related to the transition to a lower carbon economy, and have categories such as policy and legal, technology, market, reputation. And then the physical risks are those related to the physical impacts of climate change. The sub-risks within each of those get into even further detail. An example could be a policy risk, which is changes to national legislation, or a technology risk is data availability of monitoring systems, or chronic physical risk is changing temperature. Then the following elements gather further detail into the specific risk, such as the value chain stage of that risk, the risk type, the geographic location of this risk, and then a narrative text box to enter detailed description of that risk. As you can see, the risk type and value chain stage are key elements of a climate risk assessment. And then the question gets into the financial effects of the risk. Also has a long drop-down list, so your company can select those that are most applicable, such as brand damage or increased compliance costs. You also select the time horizon over which the risk is going to have an effect, which gets back to our definition of short-term, medium-term, and long-term periods that your company uses. And then looking at the likelihood of it having a substantive effect in that time horizon. This is a drop-down that goes from virtually certain to exceptionally unlikely. So you choose where in that range your company falls on this risk. And then the magnitude of the risk from high to low. Magnitude and likelihood are two elements that each risk is assessed against in a climate risk assessment, making them key elements of this question that come from that process. And an additional narrative descriptions are then open text box regarding the effect of the risk on the financial position in the reporting period and in the anticipated time horizon that's defined a few lines above. And there are a few more elements of 3.1.1. And again, these elements must be answered for every single individual risk that the reporting organization is choosing to disclose to meet best practices of CDP. These are the numerical currency inputs, including the financial effect in the reporting year in short, medium, and long term. You report a minimum and a maximum amount for those time horizons, so it can be a range to disclose. And these are all followed up with a narrative on these financial effect figures reported. A precise breakdown of how you arrived at these financial figures and the calculation method and approach should be included there to meet CDP's best practices. And the primary response to the risk can be selected. Different ones could be engagement, nature-based solutions, compliance, things like that. That can be selected there, and then the cost of the response to the individual risk. And again, a clear descriptive narrative of where the cost of the response to the risk came from, and another narrative describing the response to the risk in detail. So it can seem daunting to complete all of these elements for multiple risks, and it can be time consuming. Many of the elements, though, can be generated through climate risk assessments. And these modules are critical aspects of the disclosure process to help guide improvements and implement corporate action to improve business resilience and environmental stewardship. So the benefit of a climate risk assessment is that these questions get a lot easier to answer through CDP every year. Just to touch on a little bit more detail of CDP for this year. So the CDP portal officially opened for the 2025 disclosure cycle. It opened in April for requesting companies, and last week it opened for disclosing companies to begin filling in the questionnaire. It'll close the week of September 15th for scored responses. CDP has not yet announced when 2025 scores could be published. So for now, these are the dates that we have. And looking at any major changes from 2024 to 2025, from 2023 to 2024, CDP underwent a huge change, consolidating their previously separate questionnaires into one integrated questionnaire with different modules and questions and different scoring methodology. So last year was a challenging year for many, and CDP has announced there are minimal changes to the 2025 questionnaire in an effort to prioritize consistency. There were no major overhauls to the structure of methodology, just a number of technical fixes and clarifications. There were also efforts to continue stronger alignment with some of the standards that Sarah mentioned earlier, like IFRS S2 and ESRS E1, as well as expanded support and guidance provided by the organization.
Okay, so gotta touch on a few best practices over the next couple of slides. So these are more general best practices that we recommend when completing the CDP questionnaire to really help your organization submit a strong and effective response. Excuse me. So first, really important here is to ensure that every aspect of the question is answered. That means do not leave any boxes blank unless specifically noted in the question guidance. So CDP questions often have multiple components, as you just saw when Megan went through the examples of the risk questions. So these might include narratives, data fields, and checkboxes. And it's really important to address every part of this question. Leaving blanks can potentially result in a lower score or missed opportunities to showcase any of your efforts. And even if a question does not seem applicable to your organization, it's good to provide a brief explanation rather than leaving it empty. One of the only cases in which you may leave boxes blank is when reporting emissions. So for example, if you have measured scope 3 and some categories are not applicable to your organization, you should leave these boxes blank rather than put a 0, because if you put a 0, CDP assumes that you have actually measured it and you measured 0 emissions. So for those specific questions, the guidance prefers you to leave those blank, but for all other questions, unless noted, you should fill in every single box. The second point here is to use the STAR format when completing narrative questions. The STAR format stands for situation, task, action, and result. And this format really helps structure your narrative responses clearly and concisely and ensures that your answers are contextual, action-oriented, and outcome-driven, which is exactly what CDP reviewers are looking for when they score your responses. Ensure that your narrative answers are specific to the environmental issue. So CDP covers multiple environmental topics, as we've mentioned. So you need to make sure that your responses are tailored to each issue you're addressing and avoid using generic language, and instead really highlight how your organization is responding to each unique environmental challenge. In many cases, as we've said, you will be able to denote which environmental topic you're referring to, but it's still important to be as specific as possible here. Next is to demonstrate performance with metrics and targets. CDP really values quantifiable evidence of progress, so it's important to include any relevant metrics like emissions intensity, energy consumption, or climate-related capital expenditures. And it's also really important to reference any targets your organization has set, how you've been tracking those targets, and what progress you've made towards meeting them. And then be as transparent as possible. Transparency is really at the heart of CDP's mission. So be honest about where you are, even if you're early in your sustainability journey. And being clear and candid really builds credibility and helps you to identify areas of growth and improvement. So following these best practices can help you improve your score, but also strengthen your organization's overall sustainability strategy. And it's really more about compliance. It's about using disclosure as a tool for continuous improvement and leadership in environmental performance. So this slide specifically focuses on best practices for disclosing climate-related risks, which is a really important part of the questionnaire. And CDP places a really strong emphasis on how organizations are identifying, assessing, and managing risks and the practices. And these practices are essential for producing a high quality and credible disclosure. So show how your risks impact your business model, operations, and value chain. CDP asks organizations to go beyond generic statements and clearly articulate how climate risks affect their core business. So again, this includes both physical risks and transition risks. And it's important to be specific which parts of your operations are vulnerable, how might your supply chain or your customer demand be affected by these. The second, as we've said many times throughout this presentation, is to conduct scenario analysis to assess your resilience. So CDP, again, aligns with TCFD and IFRS S2, both of which require scenario analysis. And this means evaluating how your business would perform under different climate futures, such as a high or low warming scenario. It's not just about risk, but it's also about resilience. So show how your strategy holds up under stress and what adjustments you're prepared to make for the future. Assess the financial impact of the most likely and impactful risks. They really want to see that you have quantified the financial implications of climate risks, and this could include potential revenue loss, increased operating costs, or capital expenditures for adaptation. Work with your finance and risk teams, if applicable, to determine whether these risks are material to your business, and be specific when you're explaining your methodology and how you came to those conclusions. And lastly is defining board and management oversight. So governance is a really big scoring area in CDP. So clearly describe how climate-related issues are overseen at the board and executive levels. This might include integration into corporate strategy, risk committees, and even executive compensation. And showing strong governance shows that your organization takes climate risk really seriously, and it's embedding it into its overall decision-making process. So these practices are not only to help you improve your score, but they can also really strengthen your organization's ability to navigate a changing climate. And, being transparent, data-driven, and strategic, you really position your organization as a leader in climate resilience and sustainability. And that is the end of our presentation, and we would love to take any questions.
Thank you so much. We have a couple questions here, and then if anybody has questions while we're going through these, please feel free to submit them. Now is the time. You have CDP experts on the phone and ready to answer. First question here is, what types of data are most critical for accurately disclosing climate-related risks?
That's a great question. So I would say, first of all, if you have an established ERM system and you already define certain thresholds for financial materiality, this would be really important to disclose in CDP and any other reporting standards that ask you for climate-related risks. Additionally, being transparent about, for example, looking at physical risk, about your locations and what exactly they are vulnerable to. If you've done any other assessments with insurance companies, this data is really important to disclose here. So yeah, I would say those are the really important ones. Megan, do you have anything additional you want to add?
No, you touched on it. I was going to add the insurance one because that is super helpful to, have any groundwork that's already been laid included, and make sure that, you don't have to duplicate any efforts. So that's a really crucial one to ask about, because it might not be something that you think to include because it doesn't fall under kind of this environmental topics hat that you might have on at the time.
All right, next question. Are there sector-specific risks or disclosure expectations companies should be aware of?
That's also a great question. I would say it really depends on your sector and industry. I know, for example, we've seen quite a lot of risk disclosure in the packaging and plastics industry around the EPR laws that are emerging not only in the US, but in the EU. So I would say this has come up many times with our clients who are in this industry, and we've seen that their peers have been reporting on these risks as well. So I think it's really important to be transparent about that, especially if you do fall within, the EU and you are required to report under CSRD, or you follow, or you're required to report under CBAM. These are also important risks to disclose, especially under the policy-related transition risks. And I would say that if your peers are reporting on it, it's likely that this risk is probably impactful to your business. And if you've already done things to help mitigate some of these risks, it may be less impactful for you specifically, but we always encourage, our clients to really take a closer look at their peers, competitors, and see what risks they're reporting on, and see how that might be applicable to their business as well.
Thank you. Okay, next question. What trends is CDP seeing and how companies are approaching climate risk disclosure in 2025 and beyond?
I think that CDP is seeing they had their highest response rate in their records last year to the questionnaire in general. So I think a lot more companies are using this, whether it's voluntarily or that their customers are requesting they respond. Overall, that they're seeing those more mature submissions that have come back year after year are really improving the quality of their submission by including these details and taking these initiatives outside of the questionnaire to implement these actions that they can take. So I think it's an increase overall in quantity and quality when it comes to the risk disclosure.
Yeah, I would just add to that maybe that, we've seen a lot of our clients specifically that have been required now to report under multiple different regulations that require risk disclosure, and really using CDP as a way to prepare for these different types of, or different regulations. So this might include, either IFRS or the California Climate Disclosure Law. This is a very common one that we're seeing. And, this is really going to help you prepare. Every question that's asked in CDP will be applicable to the requirements under the California climate law. So this is a great way to, go ahead and get ahead of the game, make sure you're prepared so that in 2026, when it's required to start reporting for the climate laws, that you've already done all of the work and have the information available.
And then last question here as it stands is, how much does it cost to respond to CDP?
Yeah, so CDP has all of the rates published on their website because it does vary by region. So based on the country you're in, there are different prices. But it's important to know if you've been requested by a customer through CDP, you shouldn't have a fee associated with your submission. So companies that are requested to disclose by CDP's capital market signatories, which might show up in your questionnaire, or if you've self-selected to disclose, if you've chosen to do this because it is something that's important to your company or you wish to include it in other parts of your business, then you would need to pay the fee based on your region. So if you set up your questionnaire, you should be able to see what the fee is, or you can check out the website ahead of time before registering if you're interested.
Thank you, Megan. All right. I don't see any more questions. I know we're coming up at time, but just to wrap us up, today, Megan and Sarah talked about what is CDP, what is the business value for CDP, risk disclosure through the questionnaire, and then various tips and tricks and best practices for submitting. So if you're going through the submission process and you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We will be sending around the recording, and we hope everyone has a great rest of their day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.